talk about the, is it working, 1, 2?
The talk in French and English. Donc ceux qui ont des headphones can have the translation, and Alexandre is going to, it's working. Ah, moi je fais juste une langue. Ok. Ah ouais, c'est vrai, le traducteur. Donc, ça...
1, 2, is it working? 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. What about now?
Et là, ça marche?
Welcome to the conversation.
I'm very loud. Ok. Donc voilà, nous allons essayer.
Welcome. We are going to discover this intersection between art, fashion, and editorial within photography. For this conversation, we have a wonderful panel of photographers joining us. For this conversation, I will moderate, and if you would like to introduce yourselves, Senta Simond, we'll start with you. Good afternoon. My name is Senta Simond. I am from Switzerland, and I work in art, photography, editorial, and commercial work. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for joining us. And we have here Malick Bodian. You have the floor. Hello, my name is Malick. I am from Senegal, and I navigate between documentary photography and world photography. Thank you, Alexandre Guirkinger. Should I say Guirkinger or Guirkinger? It's up to you. Good afternoon. I am a photographer based in Paris. And as Malick mentioned, I also work on documentary photography and also for the media and the fashion world. And now over to you, Jack Davison, British photographer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack. I'm based just outside of London. It's very discombobulating hearing the voices, so I will be a bit slow. I think will echo the rest of the gang that I also kind of skip between editorial, art, fashion, kind of because it keeps it exciting.
The boundaries are, ouais, les frontières sont plutôt floues. Donc pour commencer cette discussion, on va faire
blurry boundaries, we understand. So we are going to just recap. We're not going to talk about photography, the origin of photography and the whole history. We just don't have time. But I suppose you all walked in the aisles of Paris photo, and I am sure you have seen on the walls images stemming from artists and documentary photography, but also fashion photography. And that's why this afternoon, the point of this conversation is to talk with yourselves as artists in your personal work, artists' work. How do orders come in a way? How, when you receive an order, do you think about it when you are commissioned to produce work? How do you find that place between the commissioned work, fashion work, and personalized work? We can talk about Senta Simond, your book Rayon Vert, your editorial work also. Can you tell us, how do you make that difference? Or do you see any distinction, any difference in your work if it is commissioned, an order, we can say, from a newspaper or a brand, or when you produce your own individual artwork? How do you explain if there is a difference or if there isn't?
I think my work
I'll continue in English.
Portrait. So I'm thinking firstly about that, the individual, the character. And so it's mostly also, I feel I'm interested to have people that are going to give me the narrative than rather me. So it's very, I think I'm not one to create so much fantasy, but it's mostly, I think I want something, find some realism in my photography. either in the fashion or in like my art practice. And I think it's never anything which is very spectacular, or it's a bit also anti-dramatic. I think I'm interested in kind of like like some more. Yeah, I chose this picture because it's a bit more like a fashion, like because of the clothes. But I think it's always like there is like I think really a link between. Yeah, I think it's really about the character, and there is never also like a power dynamic going on with the subject. I feel I like to feel quite equal with my subject when I'm photographing them. And I think also to find a kind of fragility and feelings. I think this is so important to have feelings in the image. Yeah, I think also that's also what people need. So I think for me, the vulnerability and fragility that cross in between fashion and my personal work, I think is important. I feel also it's become for me a strength to show that. Yeah.
Aussi,
yes, as you mentioned, or you may have noticed, there are 4 men, and so you are the female photographer on this stage. So could you tell us, as a woman, do you have a different gaze, do you think? Do you feel it? Is photography, often I say photography is not gendered. When we look at a picture, we can't really say if it's a man or a woman who took a picture if we walk through the aisles here in Paris Photo. But for you, Senta, as a woman, do you have different sensitivity, we could say, that translates into your work? Because, of course, in this post-Me Too world and the aftermath of this movement, our society is changing, and so we understand that the photographer's gaze, eyes have changed now compared to 10, 15 or 20 years ago. Can we see this in your work?
I don't like to when people say I'm a female photographer. I like just people saying I'm a photographer also. So I think, yeah. But I mean, I do feel it's, yeah, for sure that there is like something I feel more close. I mean, I feel more comfortable also photographing women because maybe I feel I'm closer to them. And I think there is maybe a sisterhood, a bit like relation with my model. And there is no, as I said before, there is no like power, like, or something, going on like that doesn't really interest me. But I feel, and also, yeah, there is, I don't see them as something sexualized, or so that's, I feel maybe, yeah, I feel like I can also, being a woman photographing women, and allows me maybe to try more things or to go closer to the subject. But yeah, I think I really have a respect for the people I'm photographing, and yeah.
Okay. Alexandre, qu'est-ce que tu en penses, toi?
Turning to you, Alexandre, this question of between my personal work and editorial work, well, my personal work is really documentary photography and focusing on projects. I mean, there is, yes, the conceptual documentary photography I am working on, but generally speaking, my projects take a few years. And what I really love in editorial work is that different time frame. Receiving an editorial order that takes a few days, it will be published a few weeks later, so it is a completely different production process. which leads me to perhaps experimenting more. I don't know if it's experimenting or trying things out, testing something that then I can use in my personal work as an artist. So yes, there is a difference in my mind, in my view, between editorial and personal work. You are talking about these constraints, working within a framework compared to personal, your own artist work. Yes, in a way, I have to comply with the scope that's given to me, and having that short time frame, I can see what my picture looks like on a page. I can see the strengths and weaknesses of certain combinations, etc. You can see here some work I've done for fashion brands, media. And so about 6-7 years ago, for 6-7 years, I have been working in fashion photography. And I do try to prepare it in the same way I would prepare a portrait photography. So there are close links with portraiture. So taking pictures of people rather than just models, right? Trying to display who is this being? Yes, in a way like a collective portrait. Because taking a portrait in a documentary photography situation, I would be alone with a person. But here there is a common work with a makeup artist, a stylist, and hairdresser, etc., or hairstylist. So it's a different style of portrait where we project something onto this person in a way. So there is, of course, the being, the person, but also how are they dressed and where do they stand, where are they positioned. That's very interesting. Thank you. And Malick, can you tell us about your process? Because you focus on identity a lot in your work. So can you tell us about this? Perhaps a difference or close links between your editorial work and your personal artist work? What would be your view? Well, for a long time, I have to say I was convinced that documentary photography and fashion photography are extremely different, that they belong to two different worlds, two different domains for many years, because my personal work is inspired by documentary photography. So at the very beginning, when I first started out in fashion photography, in my mind, it was very different to what I would shoot, what I would do when I am, for example, at home in Senegal. But throughout my collaboration with many people, with Ibrahim Kamara, for example, or other professionals who inspired me, I realized that my work in the fashion world actually very much stems from the work I do at home in Senegal or in Africa when I travel. So, of course, it includes emotion in my work, but I know when I work in editorial work, I would be inspired by landscapes, pictures, landscapes photography, or a portrait of somebody who was dressed in a certain way. So that's where I would find inspiration in my personal work. So today, I understand certain documentary photographers keep this dichotomy, this difference, or wanting to, they don't want to step into fashion photography for a reason for another. But I think it really depends on who we are collaborating with. Does the client give me enough freedom, liberty to express myself So when we worked together for Emblemont, for example, yes, I will just, as an aside, say that Malick, you were a model yourself. So I guess that is an advantage for you. You know about the fashion world because you worked as a model. So you have seen what happens, I would say, perhaps backstage, and that surely feeds into your work. So as a photographer now, when you are directing your model, your subject, so there is perhaps a mirror effect that comes from your history, what you know about movement and posing and clothing. And so that's really interesting about your work, Malick. And so I am turning to you, Jack, because your work is remarkable. And in a way, it also shows that plastic dimension or cosmetic dimension going further into abstraction and surrealism, which borders on art. We have worked on fashion series together where the item of clothing is almost not perceptible, not visible anymore, but you can see it in a way. Let me just go back a few slides. Jack sent us a lot of photos.
Yeah, I was presuming you were going to edit me. So I just look like a massive big head now because you put everything in.
J'ai terminé le PDF il y a un quart d'heure.
You put too many in.
Yeah.
I kind of echo a lot of the sentiments of everyone, that I think the thing, it took me a long time. So I started as a street photographer and was just making pictures kind of without any context or knowledge of the industry. And I think the thing I found really hard early on was giving up control. And I think you, especially early on in the industry, you think you're meeting people that understand what you want to do, but often they are coming at it from a completely different direction. And it took a long time for me to realize that giving that away sometimes is great if it's the right person, but sometimes you're paired with someone, be it a stylist, a makeup artist, who has a completely different opinion to you of what someone should look like, how someone should dress. And often I found with older stylists, there's a very different generational gap in how they approach body sizes or casting. I think what I've found now and having more confidence in my work is that I know what percentage someone kind of wants me at, especially on a commercial job. You'll turn up, and so this is like a Margaret Howe picture. And when I worked for Margaret, I'd say it's like 80% what I would like to do, and the 20% is Margaret. But there's a job, so there's other pictures for Hermes where I'd say I'm at 30% or 40%. And sometimes you're there to click the shutter. Sometimes you're there to really get involved. And it's a real mix to kind of depending on the client. Yeah.
There is something very interesting that you said and that Malick said. Pardon, je le fais en anglais.
Yes, what you both touched on, it is, you talked about the team, both of you, Alexandre, Jack, you are part of a team, the stylists, makeup artists. But Alexandre, you mentioned a documentary photography, street photographer. They can be on the road. You mentioned Ibrahim Tamara. Malick, you learn to also work hand in hand with other people, and that feeds into your personal work, right? And I can really see it, feel it. I believe, Jack, the stylists enter into your universe and you work with them to construct, to build this image and then create something personal.
Yeah, I think it, but it's definitely about finding the right stylist. As you know, a lot of stylists don't like me because I crop out all the clothes, and they're often you can't see anything. It's just a black shape. So I think there's often a push and pull, and I think it's been a lot about finding the right people and then having the confidence with them to go, yeah, we're on the same train. We're kind of trying to get to the same kind of location. I had a question for you, Malick, which if I'm allowed. Because I met you as a model, and essentially for me, you've kind of seen behind the curtain, and you've probably seen the best and worst of the industry. Is that fair to say? Like, has that given you like more strength to like know, okay, this is the wrong situation for me, or like this is the right, like, has it helped, do you think, like seeing how the meat is made essentially?
Yeah, totally, because sorry, French. Yeah, French. Pour moi, c'est très important parce
Yes, it's
que
very important
quand j'ai commencé à faire la
because
photo,
when I
je me suis
started
rendu compte que
out
j'étais devenu
working in
un meilleur
photography,
mannequin.
I realized I
Pourquoi? Parce
became a
que
better
au début, je
model,
comprenais
actually,
les photographes.
even because I could
Alors,
understand
quand
the
j'étais comme mannequin,
photographer's
souvent les
view.
photographes me disaient des choses
As
très
a
bizarres.
model,
J'étais là,
photographers
ça
sometimes would
n'était
tell
pas
me something
bizarre.
that just sounds
J'aurais
bizarre.
touché peut-être comme ça, mais regarde.
Tilt your head
Et
this way,
quand
look that
j'ai
way.
commencé à prendre des photos de
But
moi,
when I started
finalement,
taking
en
pictures and
retournant au
in
travail en tant que
fashion
mannequin,
photography, that really fed
j'étais
into
beaucoup plus
my work
patient.
as a model. As a model, I
Je
became a lot
comprenais
more
mieux
patient
certaines choses.
and I
Bien
could
sûr, ça
better
dépend parce que
grasp the
parfois tu travailles avec
intent,
des
the
photographes
intention behind
qui sont
the
vraiment
instruction. So it depends. Sometimes we work with
s'exprimer, c'est très
certain
important
photographers
aussi,
who
mais
express
souvent c'est
themselves
très
very clearly,
difficile de comprendre.
but it's
Et
often
je pense
difficult to
que
actually understand
le
exactly
mannequinat,
what they're
ça m'a
trying to
permis
achieve.
de
So working as a
comprendre
model really led me
bien les mannequins.
to having that better
Et la
understanding,
photographie m'a permis d'être un
better
meilleur mannequin,
understanding,
plus patient et plus
and working as a
plus
photographer led me to become a
comme
more
ça.
patient and more grateful model, I would say.
Par exemple, toi, Jack, qu'est-ce que tu as demandé à ce mannequin?
Jack, for example, what did you ask this model exactly? What were your
Quelle
instructions?
était l'idée?
What was the idea, the concept?
Comment tu diriges en fait?
This is me.
How do you lead them?
So this is from a family series, and you could read a lot into this picture. I do really love my brother-in-law, but it was part of this project was, I mean, it's something we kind of talked about of using kind of a documentary approach with regards to fashion, but basically a part of this was a project on the place we were leaving. So it's a village that we used to live in. And it was also a way for me to kind of show my family what it's like. Because I think you have ideas and concepts of what a photo shoot is like, and they do understand. They're over there. Hi. But I think no one realizes the amount of faff and like work and other elements that go into it, because it's not a purely creative thing. It's a practical thing. It's talking to people. It's making people comfortable. It's kind of marshalling kind of people into a space that you can kind of then hopefully get something that feels close to. I mean, I guess for quite a few of us, I mean, most of us here, we're trying to stumble across something that feels like we found it rather than something that we've made. And so hopefully you're not seeing the kind of orchestration, I guess.
Et un autre sujet assez
yes, another topic we mentioned yesterday, we talked about it together, Alexandre, because for the magazine editorial work yesterday, you mentioned, Alexandre, that museums didn't used to really want to exhibit photographs, but now it is increasingly popular. And so we see photographers also being in magazines, and editorial work is exposing your work in the same way galleries or museums would, in a way. And so the question is, now in Paris Photo, we have all the best photographers and best fashion photographers, and Davison photos, which would be sell thousands and thousands of euros in Newton, and these major photographers. But what do you look for? Senta, for example, when you work with magazines, I think you work with certain magazines, you pick the ones you want to work for, and then what do you like when they order the commission work from you?
It's always about portrait people. So I started like also photography. When I did my book, I was photographing. I did a book only about portraying friends, only female model. And I think with fashion, I can continue to explore that too into magazine. And that's also how I feel very exciting to work in fashion. It's just like a bit of an extension of my work, But it's just when I work with a stylist and it's a collaboration and it's become obviously very, it's different. There is more constraint also because you need to have some credit in a magazine. So you cannot just crop a picture and do nude. But I think it's also interesting that I can express myself differently. And I think this is just, I'm very curious actually about just photographing people. And I think through, talking also with casting directors now, I used to do myself casting and just looking for people by myself. And then I think it's now, I'm developing something differently when I work for a magazine.
Ça, par exemple, c'est une image que tu as prise comment?
This is a picture you took. Was it personal work? A magazine order? No, this is a friend of mine. I took a picture of her in Switzerland. It's personal work, yes. So there was no casting director or stylist in this case. But then we see this work. These photographs. Here, you try to find and display this authenticity in your work. And then depending on the brand, the client, certain give you more freedom to go as far as you would like.
But I think it's also something interesting because then you can have total freedom when I do my own work. There's no limits. But then there is a constraint in the other way with editorials, commercial. I mean, it's always a bit of, because you work with more people. So but I think I also like that to have some constraints. So it's really a bit more challenging. It makes you think how I can bring your signature a little bit into like when you work with other people. But I think there's always a bit the same element about, it's always very minimalist. It's always about portraying someone. It's never projecting also so much like an idea of an image about something that doesn't exist, but just taking the essence of people and just translating.
Aussi. Très instinctif finalement aussi.
Oui, que je laisse beaucoup de liberté aussi.
Sorry, can I ask one question? This is kind of all of you, but particularly you. Do you ever find that bringing people that you kind of a street cast or people that are close to you, do you ever find that you make a mistake in bringing them into a commercial space or an editorial space?
No.
Okay.
I did once. Ouais. I did.
Est-ce que parce que j'entends beaucoup parler de contraintes.
I hear a lot about constraints, which is very interesting because the commissioning word is a sort of constraints. Do you think constraints help you do something you are even more proud? Have you had the feeling you went further as an artistic director? I always have constraints. I'm an artist. I'm an artistic director. There are constraints and a framework, but within this framework, it helps, it challenges me. And sometimes I realize I even go further. To begin with, I'm annoyed. I don't like it. But in the end, I realize I go further. Is it something that happened to you? Do you appreciate this constraint aspect? Any of you? I have an example of something we did together. But it's not related to fashion, related to Gérald Thomasin, an actor who was accused of a murder. And there was a strong constraint because the idea was to make his portrait, but he was in prison. So it was not possible to go there and take pictures of him. So how could we tackle this, address this with written traces. And there was a cop who had said that as he had played in films where he was a murderer, the idea was to identify a certain number of images from these films where, you could think he had this qualities. So with all these documents, there was a convincing element, and that's something I added in my personal work. Yes, there was even a book. Yes, I went on with the work through this book. Yes, that's a very telling example of how a commissioning becomes an artistic work. A book can become something else. Is it something, Malick, you realized that a commissioned work gave way to something else? Your exhibition took place yesterday. Were there images that you had done during commissionings or? Not really for this exhibition, because it's something which is that I did a very long time ago, at a time where I said to myself, personal work and fashion work are really different. It happened once, I think, that I was sent to make photographs for Ghana, for a brand called West Bunner. And through this project, it was one of the first times I was working in Africa for fashion work. It was one of the first projects that made me realize that I could mix personal work and fashion. With this commission, I realized something important. Yes, there was something in you. Yes, it inspired me a lot afterwards, how I could take pictures of people and clothes on people. Generally speaking, I think that it's always an issue of collaboration and trusting people. If I accept to work with you, it's because I trust you on the project and the assignment you give me. And if you ask me to work with you, well, you should trust me too. So it's always a good end. It's always a good end. It's not a bad constraints. Constraints are not always bad. I don't know how much time do I have left? Okay. I have another question. We are in 2024, in a digital era. There are social media, so image has changed. Print are different, even if there are many magazines and books still. But social media changed the way in which we consume images and watch images. Do you conceptualize that, or do you have a different way of thinking about the image, knowing that images might be seen on a very small format on telephones, or it doesn't affect your work? And in your artist work, do you use this media to, how could I put it? I imagine that thanks to Instagram, which is an instantaneous portfolio, you were able to get some opportunities. How do you analyze or imagine the evolution of your work at the age of social media? You are a star in social media.
So from my experience, I found photography through the internet. I found it on Flickr, Tumblr, and that was my first kind of eyes open moment, seeing kind of just like a deluge of imagery. And I kind of trained myself at that point I was making pictures and posting them like daily. And that's kind of became quite like an addictive thing because it was a way to connect to the world. It was a way to kind of just interact with people. And Instagram still gives me that feeling, but like a lot less easy. I always kind of describe Instagram as a bit like a deal with the devil. Like, it's definitely not probably the best thing for you, but it does generate work. And I often find that when like I'm talking about people say, oh, how do you get commission for certain things? It's often just showing people online, like, this is the stuff I like, and this is what eventually will lead someone to ask you to make it for them. Like, I can't remember how we first met, but often it's a picture that you've done at home. It's never about necessarily making work for a commission to get that commission. Often people look at your personal work and they're like, this is what we want. They're very rarely going, oh, we like this campaign you did, can you do something similar? It's always like a personal picture that sparks something. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy the kind of thrill of still posting stuff, but yeah, it's Instagram's too circular, too quickly.
Il y a quelque chose aussi qui est de l'ordre du produit. J'ai l'impression que la photo est devenue, l'image est devenue presque un produit.
Pictures have become any product to be consumed. So there is a danger when you do too many of them. Alexandre, you said the way you work goes against that. Even if you use the digital, you work in chambers. So your economy is different from someone like Jürgen Taylor, who shoots with an iPhone.
Comme nous tous, en fait. Alors, c'est philosophique, son travail, finalement. C'est-à-dire que
his work is philosophical. He says that he wants to use a daily asset, but in a different way. But you're not in that. I'm not very. You're saying that I'm not very good at social media. It is true that it's a bit absurd when work with a chamber and then have your photo, a very small photo on a telephone, a smartphone. Yes, social media is more of a constraint for me and something painful. Well, recently I have put everything on the same level, some old images or more recent ones, and well, I had fun with that, but it's been a long time. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Second part of your question was, yes, using a chamber at one point with a flow of images that are used, yes. When you use the great format chamber, the economic constraints is important. So your relationship to the picture is different. And yeah, I like it. It's not conceptual. It's the constraint and the size that it has in a room or the relationship to the model is okay. It's okay for me. I think I'm best at doing that rather than with a smartphone. Yes, it was also a question for... Well, my objective was to tell you that photography costs money, and fashion is also a means to live out of your art and to be able to have personal projects. You have personal projects. Brands come for us to do some shooting. We can live out of our art and continue to have personal work. Well, your process is less cost effective, and that's one of the reasons why young photographers go to fashion, turn to fashion, because they can live out of it and then experiment more personal work. And sometimes create links between the two. Jack, we will come back. There are examples of your work. We're not going to quote the brands, but there are. You entitled this commercial work that feels commercial. Here you can see that these are images.
I mean, that was a private folder for you, but no kidding. No, I think if you go back to that work, there's always because you're being paid to do something, there's often, of course, you have to accept that you're not going to get your dream thing to make whatever you want. I think we've all experienced that. And for instance, with those, you said we can't say the brand, but it's fairly obvious. With those Hermes pictures, I like working for them. It's like they're always we love them. It's always rewarding, but it's a very different process. It's so for instance, one picture they saw I used I did an editorial. If we go back to the foam one, I did a fashion story that we used lots of foam to recreate sea foam. And this was I've never had it to be quite so transactional, but they saw the picture and were like, can we do this for the campaign? And I've never had it quite so close to what I've done before. I was definitely torn because I went, well, I've just done that. But obviously I'm also in the back of my head going, if I don't say yes, someone will say yes. And I mean, this was hilarious to make because obviously Hermes clothes cost quite a lot of money and foam is not good for leather. So the reality of actually doing this was a nightmare. But I think, so for instance, if we go to a picture that I think, I don't know what the title was, but basically there's work that you can make in commercial spaces and where you can eke out pictures that you love. I'm exhibiting a picture downstairs that's from a campaign that snuck through the gap. And I think sometimes you can take those opportunities wisely and go, actually, there's stuff here for me as well as delivering for the client. The hardest thing I think I learned as a photographer was not feeling shame about doing commercial work and realizing that we've got to get paid. Avondon probably did toothpaste commercials. And I often, most of you who know my work, you probably haven't seen these pictures before because I don't necessarily publicize them because I go, okay, there's something in there of me, but a lot of it's not me. And I'd rather show the stuff that is me.
No, but it's you also. Because, no, it's you. No, put back the headphone. Non, mais honnêtement,
honestly, yes, it is more commercial maybe, but it's not a bad word. But when you have a look at these images, even if it's more commercial, there's poetry there, surrealism. It's not a white background. There's part of you in this work. And for you, it's the most commercial you've ever made. You see what I mean? Behind that, there is an advertising agency. Maybe there's a lack of communication with a big advertising agency who wants something specific, but we feel there is part of you in there. Another photograph might be more interesting, and it's if we go back there. So this one.
Yeah, I mean, even the ones before, the Margaret stuff for the row, this is okay. Okay. These are pictures that I eked out from campaign shoots, and they use some of these pictures. Some of them were ones that I always loved that didn't get used. And I often find it's the ones that fall on the cutting room floor that are the ones you love. Yeah, I mean, so this is a job where I'm doing what I'd like to do. which is nice. It's very fortunate. I'd love to know what everyone's worst job was. Oh, you're all too coy.
Mon pire, vous avez...
No comment. Je veux dire,
Ouais, mais avec Eric Pillot, je pense.
So it's private jokes there.
Ok.
All right.
Peut-être le mot de la fin.
Maybe
Senta,
an end word
quelque
for
chose
you,
à ajouter
Senta?
ou pas
You have
sur,
something to
sur
add
cette
on
discussion? Est-ce que tu as
in this
un dernier
discussion?
mot que tu voudrais ajouter?
Is there a conclusion, a final word you'd like to
No, I
say?
think it's great actually to. Yeah, it's very challenging working in different fields, in fashion or commercial or and continuing to also do your own personal practice, which asks also quite a lot of effort when you are working, but it's good because it's always like, everything for me, it's become a body of work, and it's like it's gonna everything I'm doing, even if it's like a really bad commercial, it's always like feeling like yourself for your photography, and just questioning also yourself, and I think it's nice to be allowed to express in different fields like fashion, or I think it's and also like it's lucrative, so it's I think it's good that everything should be more democratized today.
On en revient peut-être à un truc que tu as dit tout à l'heure quand tu disais que toi, tu ne te considérais
We
pas
come
comme
back.
une
It boils down to
photographeur.
what you said earlier on. You don't consider yourself as a female photographer. Do you accept the idea of being labeled as a documentary photographer or fashion photographer, or do you consider yourself as a photographer? Do you consider yourself of a something photographer or just a photographer?
Moi, oui, je pense que
I think
c'est juste photographe.
I'm
Je
just a
pense qu'en
photographer.
fait, personnellement, je pense que c'est
Personally,
bien
I
d'être
think it's
ouvert
good
d'esprit,
to be
parce
open-minded,
que je
because
pense que parfois c'est très
sometimes
dangereux
it's
d'être fermé
dangerous
d'esprit et de
to
dire
be
qu'on n'aime que ça, parce que le
close
monde
and
change
saying
et
you just
on
like
ne sait
this.
jamais ce qu'on
The world
rate.
is
Moi,
changing
j'aime
and you
bien
never know what you're
expérimenter,
missing. I like to
explorer.
experiment,
J'aime bien faire
to
des photos du
explore.
paysage.
I like
De temps en
to
temps, j'ai envie de faire
photograph
ça et
landscape.
parfois j'ai envie de faire des photos de mode.
Sometimes I want to do fashion
Et
photographs.
d'autres fois, j'ai envie
And
d'aller
sometimes I want
documenter un
to
sujet un peu plus
document
sensible.
a
Donc je
sensitive
pense
topic.
que
So
c'est photographe tout court.
I'm a photographer. That's it.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Je sais pas, on peut
Are
poser
there,
des questions. Est-ce qu'il y a
are
des
there
questions?
questions in the room?
Ah ouais, il y a un-
Hi, I'm taking that moment. I'm a casting director, Kira. Hi. And, but I'm actually coming from photography and art, and my interest in people and made me become a casting director. Yet I find the world of fashion really gatekeeping and hard to get into. And I think there's always this one moment that gets you into this world and like get you recognized. And I would love to know, what was that moment for you guys, which got you into this world of being seen?
Should we go in a line? For me, when I first came to London, I had a big book of photographs, and I took it to. I didn't know the routes. I didn't assist. I didn't know that was the kind of natural route into the industry. So I would drop a book off at an agency and say, "Here's these pictures. I'll come back in kind of a week and pick up the book." And so I did a lot of door to door, and it wasn't. And I basically got no replies. And then a magazine in London called Port Magazine, I'd seen the book and was like, "We'd like you to do a fashion story." And then I did something that was quite close to what I would have liked to have done. And then the people emailed back. And I think sometimes art directors, magazine editors, they're not that great at like kind of figuring out how you could work in that world. And my book was a mess, so God knows.
Moi aussi, j'ai fait beaucoup de porte-à-porte. C'est pas venu d'un coup.
I did a lot of door-to-door too. Many small editorials brought bigger ones, but it's a lengthy work.
I actually have a funny story. When I was younger, I always dreamed to become a football player. And I used to work in this restaurant, and actually I got scouted by a casting director who was working with Jack. So this is how I became a model. And for me personally, I think it's about people who believe in you. I think sometimes you don't realize what you don't know. I don't know. It's good to open your mind. And for me, the moment, even as a model or as a photographer, that I was seen, it was when someone came to me and opened the door for me. And yeah.
I think it took me quite a long time. I explored a lot of things before doing my book in 2018. And then I was in this Aperture Book Award. And from that, things went quite quick. I started quickly to do some fashion photography, but I had a long way before.
What about you?
I was.
Thank you very much for your time. I had a question because I'm a master's student trying to write my thesis on brands and photography. And for some reason, it seems that fashion photography is not recognized as an art. I think it was Richard Avedon at some point that was proposed to do a big exposition about his work and said that he wanted to exclude all his fashion work. And nowadays, I feel like there is this whole issue that we mentioned about commerciality and your job, what brands let you do and express about yourself. And my question to you is, don't you think that it's somehow time to, fight against this diktat or hegemony of the brands trying to tell you what to do or trying to impose a bit on the vision? Although I know the storytelling is very important in, the whole brand, the whole campaigns, even editorials. To what extent do you think the future of the photography in itself and fashion photography more precisely depends on nowadays your job to try to impose your vision as photographers, as individuals, as humans that have a taste and, believe in your work? And
That's a good question. It's something that I always do struggle with, because all of us got into it because we love it. And it's always, you don't want to kill that. And you don't want to kind of destroy the reason you started doing it. It's definitely a tightrope walk. And it's one like I make mistakes on like yearly and get into situations where you go, okay, these were the wrong people. These were not the right people. It becomes, I think, easier as you get older, especially since I had kids, to make those decisions and go, actually, no, I don't want to do that. It's hard. I mean, the elephant in the room with editorial that I didn't know about until I started the industry is the amount of money that's expected to invest in. Like a magazine like Le Monde is different. Like they have budgets, but most magazines don't. And whenever I would discuss with my mum and dad and say, oh, I'm doing a job, they would go, oh, are you being paid or is it a free one? And I've always found that like that's something that's not talked about enough, that kind of expectation of cost and the burden of it. Because the cheapest thing for me is to take a picture. I walk on the street and I take a picture, and then it's still a me picture and it's very close to what I love and what I do, and they're the most rewarding pictures for me. But yeah, it's a juggling game.
Et c'est vrai que ça a changé. Il y a 40 ans, on pouvait encore vivre.
things have changed. 40 years ago, you could live from magazine photos. Yeah, documentaries, portraits. Yes, photographers lived out of it. It does not exist anymore. It has become a display, a platform, but which depends on the advertising you're going to be able to make. Otherwise, you cannot work for magazines. And to answer the question in relation to the idea that fashion photography is perceived as less important, well, it has changed a lot. Since several years. In 2010, Davison, with the elephant photographs bought by Dior. 6 months ago, Jürgen Taylor was exhibited in the Grand Palais, and he's at the border of what we're talking. He's a fashion photographer, but also a documentary and an artist photographer. He is a good example of this photography that is considered fashion photography, that was considered less important, and which is now on walls and exhibited, sold, and appreciated. There is a long list of photographers who represent that. You see Haraki, Paolo Reversi, de Marchelier. Paris Photo is a good example of the fashion photography becoming art photography. It has changed a lot, and there is a new generation of photographers which is bringing soul, an added soul, so to speak. You are bringing something special and a society aspect to fashion, a political aspect, a personal aspect. So beyond shooting fashion, you integrate things that go beyond, and it transcends fashion photography. And we have this discussion because fashion photography is not only meant to be printed in a fashion magazine, but it's also an artistic work, even if it's done in the team. The Kiss of Douaneau, well, it was two actors. He made a lot of images. They wandered around Paris for days, and it became this iconic photograph. Well, the Kiss of Douaneau. No, it's not a fashion photograph, but it's also composed. It's staged. I think it is evolving in the right direction, I think. Another question over there? The last one? Hello, thank you very much. I wondered about the simplification of the visuals. There is an increasing number of things to read with line and colors. Does it come from fashion or Instagram itself? As it is small, you have to understand very quickly what it is about. You have to attract the gaze, and it requires less work from the audience. How does it influence your work? There are less elements in photographs, increasingly less. I'm not going to answer for you, but they all have different universes. Jack, for instance, has less things in his photographs. There are many things to see in his photographs. There are many layers. And Senta, you're more minimalist in your work, maybe more readable, structurally speaking. I will let you answer, but I think, okay, maybe you can give your own answer. It is less built, it's maybe more direct, but I don't know. I don't ask myself of the simplification. I think it depends on the topic, on your subject. Sometimes when you take a picture with a lot of emotion, someone who has a lot of emotion, I like the light to be simple because you have to focus on the person. And sometimes it's stylism. The stylist can has many things to show, so I like to try and make a picture that be as easy as possible for stylism. And when there isn't much emotion, that's where your photograph should be more dramatic, but that's personal. I'm very open. Other photographers have used the same kind of light, very technical.
Ouais, je pense que ça dépend beaucoup des styles. Je comprends la question parce que c'est vrai qu'avec
I
Instagram
understand
et
your
digital, on a
question
tendance
with
à
Instagram and
avoir les images en
digital.
petit, donc à aller peut-être
We
droit au but,
tend
avoir des choses plus
to
lisibles.
see
Après, ça
small
dépend du photographe.
images,
En
but
effet,
it
il y a
depends on
tellement
from one
de personnes
photographer
qui ont
to
des
another.
univers différents.
Many
Certains
people
très
have
chargés,
different
certains vont dans le minimal. Je suis
worlds.
pas certain
Some
que
are more minimalist, some
le
others
support
no.
digital
I don't
influence
think that
forcément
the
la réalisation de l'image. Je pense
digital
qu'à un
world
moment, c'est
influences
une
the
plateforme sur
image.
laquelle on peut,
It can be a
dont on
platform
se sert en fait pour faire
you
véhiculer son
use,
travail, mais je suis pas certain
but I'm not
qu'aujourd'hui,
sure today.
certains doivent le faire. Je
Well,
pense par exemple aux
maybe
pochettes
some
de
do.
disques.
I
Bizarrement,
think about
en tant que graphic designer, quand on
LP
fait un pochette
photographs.
d'album, on sait que
As a
grosso modo,
graphic
ça va se retrouver
designer,
sur
when you
Spotify,
make
donc très petit, et
a
peut-être qu'il faut aller
poster
vers
for
des choses
an
plus
LP,
directes, etc. À l'époque, avec
maybe
le
you
vinyle,
should
on
be
pouvait
more
peut-être plus
direct. In the
raffiner, aller
past,
dans
it could be
des
more
recherches typographiques,
refined.
etc. Donc dans la photo, il y a
In
vraisemblablement
in
ça,
photography, there
mais
might be that,
ça
but
dépend, oui, ça dépend du
it
sujet, ça
really
dépend
depends
comme
on
dit
the
Malick, en fait,
subject, as Malick said.
parfois aussi on se retrouve face à des
Sometimes
gens,
you're
même
faced
nous en
with
commande en tant que directeur
people.
artistique, quand c'est dans un magazine et qu'on va aller shooter une personne, en
When
fonction de
you
qui on
work
va
for a
shooter,
magazine,
on se pose la
according to the
question de
person you're
qui
going to
pour le
shoot, we
shooter,
ask
parce qu'on veut
ourselves
aussi
who
raconter
is
des
going
choses.
to shoot,
Si on va shooter
because you
une
want to
personne qui
tell
a
a
subi un
story.
traumatisme et qui raconte ce
If it's
traumatisme dans un
someone
papier,
who went
on va
through
pas
a
aller
trauma,
chercher un
well,
photographe très pop qui fait des
you're
choses sur
not
fond vert,
look
qui fait
for
sourire tout le monde, etc. On va
a
plutôt aller
pop
chercher
photographer
des
with
personnes qui sont
a
un peu
green
plus dans l'intime,
background,
qui ont peut-être une lumière
maybe
qui va venir
photographers
raconter
that
en
are
fait
more
et qui va
intimate and
apporter
are
une
going
distance
to
avec le sujet. Donc
tell
c'est plutôt
a
ça au
different
début, et
story.
ensuite le digital et
And
les
then
images sont
the
là pour
digital and images are
en
there
fait faire
to
véhiculer et faire voyager ces images plus rapidement
convey
que
these
un magazine.
images
Voilà, un
quicker
magazine comme
than a
le magazine du
magazine.
Monde, c'est imprimé le week-end, le samedi,
Magazine du
en France.
Monde is
Donc s'il n'y avait pas
printed
de
in
digital,
France and
ça
during the
serait, la
weekends.
diffusion
If
serait un tout petit
digital
peu limitée.
did not exist,
Peut-être
dissemination
une
would
dernière question.
be
Non, c'est fini.
limited.
C'est signe que c'est fini.
Okay,
Donc,
I'm
je
told it's
voudrais
over.
remercier
So
déjà
I
Paris
would like
Photo de
to
nous avoir
thank Paris
reçus. Merci
Photo
à
for
Anna et
welcoming
ses
us.
équipes.
I would like to thank
Et
Anna
merci
and her
également
teams.
à nos quatre
Thank
invités.
you
Et
all.
merci à vous d'être venus
Thank you for
à ce
the
talk.
audience for coming to this talk. Thank you.